Welcome friends to Farm Fresh Designs 59. I am so excited about today's video because I've got some new techniques to show you when I'm using the IOD molds and resin. So let's go ahead and get started on our first project. So in my first project, I'm starting out with 2 pieces of a thin plywood, and they are 8 by 13. I'm painting just the top of each one and the sides with Rust-Oleum linen white chalk paint. I'm using the new IOD Mercantile stamp, and I'll be stamping the laurel with the little rooster in the middle. And I play with it just a little bit to make sure that when I lay that rooster down, it's going to match up with what is on the original piece of plastic. I've got it on a thin mount, and I'm using IOD black ink. And I've already made little pencil marks on my board that are is where the center is. And so on this thin mount, there's a blue line that goes right down the middle, and I just make sure that that blue line matches up with those little pencil marks. Then once I lay it down, then I'm going to keep one hand still while I just move around with the other hand to press that stamp down. And then I just kind of switch back and forth with the different hands just to make sure that I've got my fingers on all those different pieces of the stamp. And I make sure that that ink is stamped in there very well before I pick up the thin mount. And when I pick it up, I pull it straight up, either that or pull it straight up from one side so that I can make sure that I don't make any smudges. Now in that same stamp, there is a grain stripe. So I am going to stamp that on either side of the board, but this time I use the IOD red ink. And I've also made little marks on the side because I need to have a little bit of a white edge on either side. And so once I get that first one down, then I go over to the other side and make sure that that one is in the right place too. Now, when I put that first stamp down, there were parts of it that I guess I just didn't press down enough. So I just made sure that I lined it up real good, and so that it would be in exactly the right spot, and tried to fill in those spots that the ink didn't go down as well. So I'm going to put the grain stripe on the other side in just the same place with just the right margins. And this time when I stamp it and I press it down on that piece of wood, I feel like I got a better impression. So I'm not really sure if the first time I just didn't ink it up enough, but this time I was really pleased with the way that it came out. And with your stamps, what I like to do is I like to go ahead and wash them right away so that that ink doesn't settle onto that stamp. And I just wash them with warm soapy water. Okay, so now we're getting ready for something new that I kind of came up with. And if you've watched my videos before, when you see me pull out this wire, you think, wonder what she's going to do with it this time. So this is just some floral wire, and I just cut a really long strip, and I'm just kind of twisting it back and forth because I've got some stronger wire that I have now gotten, but it wasn't going to work for this particular project. And this is the IOD Classic Elements mold, and I'm using amazing casting resin that sets up in 10 minutes. And there's part A and part B, and you pour them in equal amounts, stir them up really well, and it goes from cloudy into clear, and that's when you know it's ready to pour. And if you've not used resin before, it's just good practice to have another mold off to the side. Just in case you have a little bit extra, you can pour it into that. Now on that wire, I let it sit for just a second, and then I stick that wire into that mold. And I just actually just sit there and hold on to it until I know that it's got a really good grip before I let loose of it. And it's coming out of that. So this is where I came up with this idea. I was going to make some handles for this pretend tray. And so that was why I needed 2 pieces of wood. So I took that wire, kind of slid it between those 2 pieces of wood and used glue to connect those 2 pieces of wood. And then I clamped it really well. And then I had some handles for a tray. And after it set up really well, then I put clear wax on those pieces only. And then I went back with black wax, because with you use a brown wax or a dark black wax, if you don't put clear on it first and you think you've got too much black wax on it, it's not going to come off. So if you've got clear wax on it first and then you put on too much dark, it's real easy to wipe it back. And so this is my new idea to make molds with resin to make tray handles. So what do you think? It's kind of just a little bit different. I haven't seen anybody else do it before. And when I first did it, I was a little bit unsure. But since I have taped this part of the video and I've had it clamped really well, those little handles that I've made, they are really solid and they're not going to move. And I did not make them double-sided because it's just going to be sitting down flat. Okay, so now we're moving in to the next way that I'm using the IOD molds today. But we're going to start off and I'm going to make another tray. And this is the new Roycycled Paper. And I'll make sure to link it in the description box below. So these are just some trays that I bought off of Amazon. I think they came in a set of 5 for, I think it was $14.99. And they're just graduating sizes. And I'll make sure to put that in the description box below. And they're just kind of a thin wood. So I paint it with Rust-Oleum chiffon cream. And I have already measured out that Roycycled paper. So I cut it, which is not something I normally do, but because it's going to fit to the edges of this tray, I didn't tear it that time. And it's going to hang over just a little bit, so I just kind of play with it and push it down, and then I go back and trim off that extra. And I'm actually using Pen Art Decoupage varnish and glue. And I start by putting down just a little bit, and then I press it down to get those little edges that I need to cut off, and I cut those off, and then I will go back and finish putting it down just little by little with that Pen Art Decoupage varnish and glue until I get to the end. Now this is something that I forgot to film, but the mold that I made on either side of this little tray was with the new IOD stamp, and it's called Verdigris. And there's 2 different pieces. So on one side, I put one piece, and on the symmetrical side or mold, I put it on the other side. And I'm painting it with Waverly Moss Green. And when I put my molds down, I glue them on with Titebond Thick and Quick. And I just let them sit for about 10 minutes or so. And I paint them when they're wet, because if you paint those molds when they're wet, you're going to have less likely to have cracking in your molds. So before I put this white wax on the mold, I like to let it set up overnight, just because when you're pushing that white wax into the mold, if it's still moist, then you're going to be more likely to mess up the details. So this time, it might not be completely dry, even down to the bottom, but it's not going to move. And when I put the white wax on it, it's not going to mess up any of the detail, because I thought that moss green was just a little bit too dark. And then I wipe it back so that that white wax kind of sinks into the mold and shows up the details. So in the past, I have used the Baubles mold to make little legs for different boxes. So this time, I wanted to make some little legs for this tray. So this time, I used the IOD Faux Bois mold, And these little pieces look sort of like bamboo, and this is a corner piece. And I make it out of resin, but this one I'm going to make double-sided. So this is how you do it. You make one of the molds, and you let it set up, and you take it out. Then you go on and pour into that same mold another little bit of resin, and you set that mold that's already set up on top, and then it kind of connects, and it makes a double-sided mold. Now, because this particular mold is kind of rounded off, I trimmed it off with a little razor. And then I'm going to put that on with a little bit of Titebond on both different sides. And then I use hot glue in the middle so it will go ahead and stick. And I made 4 of these. So now I've got some little legs for my tray. And I go back and I paint them with Rust-Oleum chiffon cream. And then I go back in, because one of the things I forgot to tell you is I used Dixie Belle Voodoo Gel Stain in the color Natural to just add just a little bit of like antiquing to the paint on the tray. And I do that on the legs. And one of the things that I didn't get filmed was I used the IOD Vintage Textures to put like a little crackle finish on it. But I just love the way that it turned out. And these are made of resin, so they're permanent and they're solid. But I probably would encourage you not to put anything like super heavy on this tray. And I just want to inspire you to look at your molds in different ways. And this was just something that I came up with because I wanted to put legs on this little tray. And this would be just like a little trinket tray. So what do you think of this new mold idea that I've come up with? Now, on that Vintage Textures, I think I did a little bit spotty on the crackling, so I'm not real happy with that. But I really like the way these legs came out. So if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel and become part of our family. So let's keep going on our next little tray. Now, this little tray, I believe I bought it at Target in like the little dollar spot. And it was something that I bought actually before Christmas. But because it's metal, I painted it with Dixie Belle Slick Stick before I painted it with Rust-Oleum Linen White Chalk Paint. Now, this is a large piece of rice paper or decoupage paper, and it comes from Decoupage Central. And I'll make sure to link it in the description box below. Now, it's got some beautiful red flowers on it, and I'm just going to use that to put on this tray. This is a larger piece of decoupage paper. So I could have used a little water pen to kind of tear it off, but I really wasn't sure what parts of it that I wanted to use, so I just tore it, and it was really easy to tear. And it's going to just lay right inside of that tray. And there's a little bit hanging off. But before I decide to glue that down, I used the IOD Kindest Regards to just stamp some script into it. So it took me a couple times of pushing that down into that little tray because it had the sides on it, and I used IOD black ink. And then I had to go back and ink it up again and put a little bit more down at the bottom. Now, some of that came up on the sides, and I did go back and painted those little edges white where the ink had kind of come up on the sides. Because this is a pretty large stamp, and it's kind of hard to handle on something small. Now, when you put decoupage paper down, it is better to put it on a white surface, but because that ink is on there and that lettering, I just painted the back of the decoupage paper. And then I pull it up, and I just lay it off to the side to dry. Then when I put it down, then that ink and that script is not going to show through. So it was still sort of plain, and so there is a border on that really large piece of paper. And so I just tore that border off, and I kind of had to piece it just a little bit here and there. And then I put that all around the edges of that little tray. And I was just shy of having just enough. So there was one little part that I didn't get it on, But that was okay because that was the part of the paper that kind of pulled up on the side of the tray. So I really didn't miss having enough of that little border to go all the way around. And then I neglected to mention this, but every piece that I use after I finish it, a lot of times I will spray Rust-Oleum clear sealer on it just to protect it. And this is just a really small tray, but I really think it's pretty in the way it came out. But that white was just a little bit too strong, and I needed something to kind of blend in with that paper. So once again, I used the Dixie Belle Voodoo Gel Stain in the natural, and I just brush it on, and then I wipe it back just a little bit, and I go along the sides, and I actually go on the bottom part of it as well. And that's just one of those things where you put it down and you wipe it back, and then you might think you need a little bit more. So it's just trial by error, and you get it to where you like it, and then you can stop at that point. But I just ended up wanting to put just a little bit more Voodoo Gel Stain so that there wouldn't be that sharp contrast. And I like the way it turned out. So what do you think about this piece? I just think it's real pretty. And then I have this really large piece of decoupage paper that I can use for other things. And so I love all the florals on this. And once again, with decoupage paper, you don't have to use the whole piece. Kind of pick and choose what parts of it you want. Okay, so my next tray is ginormous. I had my husband to build this for me a few years ago, and I was going to set it on like a little suitcase rack. And then I just never got to it. And it is big and it is heavy. And so it took a lot of paint to put on this, and it took up my whole workspace. And it was kind of hard to film. So I had painted it white originally. So I had to go back because I got some little black marks on it just from moving it around. And I painted it with Rust-Oleum chiffon cream. And then I didn't like it like that because of what I was going to put on it in just a few minutes. So then I painted it with Dixie Belle French linen. And once that dried, then this is Dixie Belle Crackle Finish. And when I put it on, I think I put on too much. And it took forever to dry. And so then I went back over it with Rust-Oleum chiffon cream. And then I used my heat gun to make that crackle come out. And then once it was all dry and I sprayed it with Rust-Oleum clear sealer, then this is a really large IOD transfer called Maze Roses. And it's so, so pretty. And it's just got neutral colored roses. But I'm using 2 large sheets of it. So because it's such a large sheet, I tape down that bottom or the top up at the top, and then I pull that piece of paper out from behind, because once you lay down a transfer, you're probably not going to be able to move it and pick it up later on. Now, when I put that second piece of paper on it, or that second part of the transfer, I go on and have to take that whole big piece of paper off of it just to make sure I get it in the right spot. And then you put it down with the transfer tool, and then you pull back that plastic, and then it's transferred. And then I go back with Rust-Oleum clear sealer to finish it off. But because I needed to do something just a little bit extra, then I pulled out my IOD Juliette mold. And it's just one large mold, and it's got all these connecting roses. And you can just use what parts you want. You don't have to do the whole thing. And I use DOS air dry clay. And I just do one side of the mold, and then I tear it apart and pick out which pieces I want. And this tray is so large that I had to set it on the floor so that I could actually film it, because it is so, so big and it's so, so heavy. And I put my molds on with Tight Bond Thick and Quick, and I painted those with Rust-Oleum chiffon cream. And then once I started taping it, I realized that I needed to go back with Voodoo Gel Stain just on those roses to kind of add some depth to it. And you'll see that in just a minute. One side it looks really good, but on one of the sides, it's close to the window when I'm filming it, so it kind of comes out like it's yellow, but it's not. But this is what it looks like, and it gives just enough depth to those molds to show the detail. And I just put that on the outside. I do not put it on all four edges because, well, that's a lot to have to do, and I just really only wanted it just a little bit. And this is the side that it only looks like that because when I was filming, it was next to the window. And so this is something I'll keep, and I'll be setting it on like a little suitcase stand, and it will just be a side table. Now, my last tray is part of that little set of trays, and I painted it with Waverly Moss Green paint, which is, I use that a lot. And once it's dry, and I sealed it, this is a transfer, and I know it's redesigned with Prima, but for some reason, I didn't save the little tube that it was in, so I don't know what the name of it is. But it has the neutral color flowers in it that I knew would really pop out on this tray. So I put a medallion of those florals in the middle, and then I just had a little bit and little pieces here and there of that transfer. So I went on and used them all up, and I just put a little bit on each side of the tray, all four sides. And then one of the things you'll see in just a minute that I didn't tape was I found a transfer with some script on it, and I put a little bit on the inside of the tray up at the top and a little bit more down at the bottom. And I just think it's so pretty. And if you've watched my channel lately, you're going to have seen this moss green paint a lot because this is probably one of my favorite colors to use these days. Along with pink, of course. Y'all see a lot of pink on my channel. And I just play with this transfer here and there until I use it all up, because I don't, have the tube that it came in. I don't have any idea what the name of it is, and I'm determined that I'm going to use all of this transfer and get it over with, because there's just so little left of it. So what do you think of this little trinket tray? I think it turned out really pretty. So now let's look at all the pieces in the video today, all of these different trays, and especially the two where I used molds made with resin in some new ways that maybe we've not seen before. I used one resin mold to make some handles, and then I used another resin mold to make some little legs for a tray. So in the comments below, tell me what was your favorite in this video today. So once again, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and make sure to hit the notifications button so you'll be notified when I upload my next video. Have a great week.